The trio made their way toward the Shadow Realm bar, the tension between them as thick as the cold night air. The streets were unusually quiet after the commotion near the warehouse, save for the distant wail of sirens still echoing in the distance. "I still think this is a bad idea," Argos muttered, her claws brushing against the gem beneath her jacket. "We don't even know if she's here." "She's here," Caleb said firmly, his pace quickening. "Where else would she go?" "She could be lying in a ditch somewhere," Argos shot back. "Thanks for the optimism," Evelyn said dryly, pulling her jacket tighter around her as the neon glow of the bar's sign came into view. As they stepped inside, the noise hit them like a wall. The Shadow Realm bar was packed, the usual din of deals and whispers replaced by loud, animated chatter. Supernatural beings of all kinds filled the room, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of speculation and awe. "You think they were actually working with Homeland?" a vampire asked his companion, his crimson eyes wide. "They were too coordinated not to be," the other replied. "I've never seen anything like it." "Did you hear about the thralls?" a troll rumbled nearby. "They say they were burning out mid-fight." "And Ravina," an ethereal spirit added, her flickering form leaning closer to her group. "She was there, right in the middle of it." Caleb's gaze swept the room, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of Rose. "This place is buzzing." "Not about deals," Evelyn noted, her tone edged with curiosity. "It's all about the pack." "And Ravina," Argos muttered, her yellow eyes darting nervously around the room. "This feels off." It didn't take long to spot her. Rose sat in the back corner booth, her usual air of authority laced with irritation. She leaned against the wall, one hand holding a glass of wine while the other tapped idly against the table. Her smirk was missing, replaced by a thin line of barely contained frustration. "She looks thrilled," Evelyn muttered. "Let's find out why," Caleb said, leading the way through the crowded room. As they approached, Rose's eyes flicked toward them, her sharp gaze narrowing. "Well, look who decided to join the party," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Let me guess. You came to check on me." "We heard the commotion," Caleb said, sliding into the booth across from her. Evelyn and Argos followed, though Argos hesitated before sitting, her gaze darting around the room. "Commotion," Rose repeated, her smirk returning, though it was tinged with sarcasm. "Darling, it's all anyone can talk about. The great and powerful pack, swooping in to save the day. It's like a bloody fairy tale in here." "They were impressive," Caleb admitted, leaning back in his seat. "Efficient, coordinated. It's no wonder people are talking." "Oh, it's not just their efficiency," Rose said, her tone dripping with disdain. "It's the spectacle, the helicopters, the thralls, the glowing handcuffs. They're the story of the century. And I've never seen this place so unfocused." "Unfocused?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You mean no one's making deals?" "Exactly," Rose said, her voice sharp. "No one's trading, no one's negotiating. It's all talk, talk, talk about the pack. And let me tell you, it's exhausting." Argos shifted uncomfortably, her gaze flicking toward the bar. "Do they know we're here? The pack, I mean." Rose snorted. "Oh, darling, they're not coming in here, not tonight. This place is warded against their type, unless, of course, they've got Silas's blessing, and trust me, that's not happening." Evelyn leaned forward, her tone serious. "You seem more agitated than usual. Did something happen?" Rose's smirk faltered, her gaze dropping to her glass. "I saw something. At the warehouse." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "What?" "2 elves," Rose said quietly, her tone losing some of its usual sharpness. "Guardians, I think. They were commanding the fight. The pack deferred to them." "Guardians?" Evelyn's voice was laced with disbelief. "On Earth?" Rose nodded, swirling her wine. "And they weren't just here for a stroll. Whatever they're after, it's big. Bigger than Ravina. Bigger than the drug." Argos leaned forward, her claws resting on the edge of the table, You think it has something to do with the gem? Rose's gaze flicked to Argos, her smirk returning faintly. If it does, darling, we're in even deeper trouble than I thought. The low hum of chatter in the bar seemed distant as Rose's words hung in the air. Guardians. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on the group, each of them processing what it could mean. Rose leaned back against the booth, her smirk gone now, replaced by a calculating look. Guardians don't just wander onto Earth, you know. They're selective, careful, and very, very dangerous. They're from Alfheim, right? Caleb asked, his sharp gaze narrowing. Part of the Guardians of the Realms? Rose nodded, swirling her wineglass absently. Yes, Alfheim's finest. They're supposed to be protectors, keepers of balance, blah blah blah. But here's the thing, if they're here, that balance is already teetering on the edge of collapse. Or, Caleb said, leaning forward, they're here to stop it from collapsing. That's what they do, isn't it? Sure, Rose replied with a wry smile, if you believe their PR. But trust me, they're not here for tea and biscuits. If they're moving openly, it's because something's gone very wrong. The faint glow of the gem pulsed beneath Argos's jacket, drawing her thoughts inward. I've heard of them, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension. All eyes turned to her, but she didn't flinch. They protect the realms, Argos continued, her yellow eyes flicking to Rose. But they don't care about people, they care about balance, order. If they think something's a threat to that, they'll destroy it. Doesn't matter what or who it is. And you know this how? Caleb asked, his tone cautious. Argos hesitated, her claws brushing against the gem. Stories. Back home we heard about them. Travellers, exiles. They'd talk about the Guardians. Some saw them as heroes. Others, she trailed off, her gaze darkening. They saw them as executioners. Caleb shifted in his seat, his expression thoughtful. That lines up with what I've heard. My mother, she was Fae, she used to talk about them. Said they were relentless. Pure magic, honed like a blade. She called them the Sentinels of Alfheim. And you've never run into them yourself? Rose asked, arching an eyebrow. No, Caleb admitted. But my mother always said if you see one, you either run or you hope they don't notice you. That's comforting, Evelyn muttered, crossing her arms. Rose set her glass down, her tone sharpening. Here's the thing about the Guardians. They don't act without a reason. If they're here, working with the pack, then whatever they're chasing is big. And if it's tied to the gem, she glanced at Argos, then you'd better believe they won't stop until they have it. Argos stiffened, her hand instinctively gripping the gem beneath her jacket. It's mine. They can't just take it. They can, and they will, Rose said bluntly. If they think it's dangerous, they'll destroy it. And if they think you're dangerous... I get it, Argos snapped, her yellow eyes flashing, but they're not getting it without a fight. We need more information, Evelyn said, breaking the tension. If the Guardians are here, we need to figure out why, what they want, and how the gem fits into all of this. Rose nodded, though her smirk returned faintly. Agreed. But if we're going to dig into the Guardians, we'll need to be careful. They don't like being scrutinized. And where do we even start? Caleb asked. Rose's gaze flicked to the bar around them, her smirk widening. Oh, darling, information is what this place thrives on. Give me a night, and I'll find us a thread to pull. As the group settled back into their seats, the weight of their situation pressed down on them. The Guardians, the gem, the pack. It was all connected. And whatever was coming, it was bigger than any of them had anticipated. Argos glanced at Caleb, her voice quiet but firm. Do you think they'll come for me? Caleb hesitated, then shook his head. Not if we stay ahead of them. We've got time. We'll figure it out. Rose raised her glass, her smirk sharp as a blade. Time is a luxury, darling. Let's not waste it. The group's conversation began to wind down, each of them falling into their own thoughts as the weight of the situation settled over them. Rose, however, remained sharp, her mind racing with possibilities. Her smirk returned, but this time it carried a dangerous edge. "Of course," she said, her tone low and almost amused. "Of course what?" Caleb asked, narrowing his eyes at her sudden shift in demeanour. Rose leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. The pack. They're at the centre of all this. Guardians, the thralls, even the drug, I'd bet. If we're going to figure out what's really going on, we need to know where they're headquartered. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And you think they're just going to hand over their address?" "Not exactly," Rose replied, her smirk sharpening. "But there are other ways." "Let me guess," Caleb said, his tone dry. "You're thinking of tracking them somehow." "Exactly," Rose said, pointing at him with a mock cheerfulness. "There are rumours about their headquarters being out in the woods somewhere, hidden, warded, the whole deal. No one's foolish enough to go poking around because, well, they don't want to end up on the pack's radar." "Smart people," Argos muttered. Rose ignored her. "But we have something, or rather someone, on our side. Darren." Evelyn frowned. "You're going to use him?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic, darling," Rose said, waving a hand dismissively. "It's not like I'm going to hurt him. I just need to get close enough to slip a tracker on him." Argos stared at her, her sharp yellow eyes wide with disbelief. "You're serious. You're actually serious." "Deadly so," Rose replied with a sly grin. "He's a member of the pack, and unlike the rest of them, he's not exactly subtle. If anyone can lead us to their headquarters, it's him." "You realise how dangerous this is, right?" Caleb said, his voice tight. "If he catches on—" "He won't," Rose interrupted, her tone breezy. "Darren likes me. Well, tolerates me. Either way, he's not exactly on high alert when I'm around." "That's because he doesn't know you're scheming behind his back," Evelyn said sharply. "This could blow up in your face." Rose shrugged, swirling her wineglass. "Darling, if I worried about things blowing up in my face, I'd never get anything done." "And what if the tracker doesn't work?" Argos asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "What if it's warded against? Or worse, what if the pack finds it and traces it back to you?" "Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Rose said, her smirk unwavering. "But for now, it's the best lead we've got." Evelyn leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms as she studied Rose. "Even if we agree to this, and I'm not saying we do, you'll need something sophisticated. A tracker that can bypass wards, camouflage itself." "I know just the person to make one," Rose said with a knowing look. "Silas has a few connections. One of them owes me a favour." "Of course they do," Caleb muttered. Rose turned to Argos, her expression softening slightly. "You don't have to be involved in this if you don't want to be, but if we find their headquarters, it might give us answers about the Guardians and the gem." Argos hesitated, her hand brushing against the gem beneath her jacket. "Fine. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you." "Darling," Rose said with a wicked grin, "everything always goes south eventually. That's half the fun." As the group prepared to leave the bar, Rose's mind was already working through the details of her plan. Darren would be her key, and she would handle him carefully. The tracker, though, had to be perfect, undetectable, untraceable, and powerful enough to pierce the wards that undoubtedly surrounded the pack's headquarters. She glanced at Caleb and Evelyn, who were already whispering to each other about contingencies. Argos followed behind, her sharp eyes scanning the room nervously. Rose's smirk widened as they stepped out into the cool night air. It was a dangerous game, but she thrived on danger. And if the pack thought they could keep their secrets from her, they were about to learn otherwise. The group trudged back to the safe house under the cover of night, the echoes of the Shadow Realm bar's chatter still lingering in their minds. The tension from their discussion about the pack, the Guardians, and Rose's bold plan hung heavy in the air. As the door closed behind them, Caleb flipped on the lights, casting the room in a dim, flickering glow. "Finally," Argos muttered, flopping into the nearest chair. "I thought we'd never get out of there." "You mean the bar or the drama?" Evelyn asked, setting her bag on the table with a smirk. Both, Argos replied, rubbing her temples. Rose, still perfectly composed despite the late hour, strolled toward the couch, shrugging off her jacket with deliberate flair. Well, darlings, rest up while you can. Tomorrow we get back to work. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the warded windows, casting a faint glow across the safe house. The team gathered around the kitchen table, mugs of coffee in hand, and the weight of the previous night's revelations etched on their faces. Rose, as usual, was the picture of poise, her hair immaculately in place, despite the early hour. She sipped her tea with an air of practiced calm before setting the cup down and addressing the group. Here's how this is going to work, she said, her tone sharp and decisive. I'll meet with Silas today. He has resources I can tap into, resources that will get us what we need to track down the pack. And what about us? Caleb asked, leaning back in his chair. You, Rose said, pointing at him with a lazy smirk, are going to focus on that shiny little trinket of ours. Her gaze shifted to Argos, her eyes narrowing slightly. The gem is the key to all of this. If the Guardians are involved, it's because of that thing, and the sooner we understand it, the better. Argos frowned, her claws brushing against the gem beneath her jacket. You say that like it's easy. Rose's smirk widened. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Evelyn glanced at the grimoire still sitting on the table. Margot's notes might have something we can use. I'll dig through them and see if there's anything about bonds like this or artifacts tied to the realms. Caleb nodded. I'll help. Maybe there's something in the Fae stories my mother told me that connects to what we're dealing with. And me? Argos asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. Am I just supposed to sit here while you all play researchers? Rose raised an eyebrow. Hardly, darling. You're the one bonded to the gem. If it reacts to anything we uncover, you'll need to tell us. Every little detail could matter. Rose stood brushing imaginary dust off her jacket. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend. Try not to burn the place down while I'm gone. Do you think Silas will really help you? Evelyn asked, her tone skeptical. Oh, he'll help, Rose said, her smirk sharp as a blade. Silas knows better than to cross me. Without another word, she swept toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor with an air of finality. As the door closed behind her, the remaining three exchanged glances. She's confident, Caleb muttered. She's reckless, Evelyn replied, already flipping open Margot's grimoire. And we're stuck cleaning up her mess, Argos added, her voice low. As Rose made her way back toward the Shadow Realm bar, the team got to work. Evelyn delved into Margot's notes, cross-referencing them with her own knowledge of magical artifacts and their bonds. Caleb shared stories his mother had told him, searching for anything that might hint at the gem's origins or its connection to Alfheim. Argos observed quietly, her hand resting on the gem as it pulsed faintly. Every so often she would glance at the others, a mixture of doubt and determination flickering in her yellow eyes. The air in the safe house was thick with tension, the weight of their task pressing down on them. But beneath it all was a flicker of hope, the faintest promise that they might unravel the mystery before it unraveled them. The Shadow Realm bar was quieter in the morning hours, its usual din replaced by the soft clink of glasses and the muted murmurs of those who never left. Rose strode through the familiar hallways, her heels clicking against the polished stone floor. Her destination wasn't the grand hall or her usual corner booth, but a door tucked away in the back, the door to Silas's office. She didn't bother knocking. Silas preferred his guests confident, and Rose knew better than to appear anything less. She pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. Silas sat behind his desk, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the entire space. Rose, he said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. Punctual, as always. Charming as always, Rose replied with a smirk, settling into the chair opposite him. Silas leaned back, studying her with sharp, calculating eyes. You said you needed something specific. A tracker, Rose said, her tone brisk. Something undetectable, strong enough to bypass the wards the pack is probably using around their headquarters. Silas nodded slowly. I know someone who can make that happen. A technician, half fae, half human. Lives in the outskirts, near the woods. She's the best in the business, but her price won't be cheap. Rose waved a hand dismissively. Price is rarely an issue when the stakes are high enough. Give me her contact information. Silas reached into his desk, pulling out a slip of paper. He slid it across the desk toward her. Her name's Leora. Tell her I sent you. Rose picked up the paper, tucking it into her jacket. Always a pleasure doing business with you, Silas. But as she stood to leave, his voice stopped her. One more thing, Rose. She turned, raising an eyebrow. You're going to give me a lecture about playing with fire? Not quite, Silas said, his expression darkening. I've been asking around about those elves you saw. Guardians, you called them. Rose's smirk faltered slightly. And? Not a single soul has ever heard of two guardians working together, Silas said, his tone heavy with meaning. They're solitary by nature, each one assigned to their own realm or mission. If you're right about what you saw, it's unprecedented. Rose folded her arms, her expression guarded. I know what I saw, Silas. Their magic, their precision. It wasn't just two elves with good aim. They were guardians. Silas leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Are you absolutely sure? Because if they were, that means whatever they're here for is big enough to break their own rules. Rose hesitated, but only for a moment. I'm sure. Silas leaned back again, his expression unreadable. Then you'd better watch your step. If two guardians are here, they're not just here to observe, they're here to act. And if you're in their way... Rose's smirk returned, sharper than ever. I've made a career out of surviving the unstoppable, Silas. I'll be fine. Just remember, Silas said, his voice low and ominous. Guardians don't see people. They see threats and solutions. Make sure you're not the former. Rose left Silas's office with the slip of paper in hand, her mind racing. The idea of two guardians working together wasn't just unusual. It was unsettling. It meant that whatever was happening with the pack, Ravenna, and the gem was far more dangerous than she'd initially thought. As she stepped back into the main bar, her smirk faltered for a brief moment. She was playing a dangerous game, but that was nothing new. The only difference now was the stakes. Tread carefully, Rose, she muttered to herself as she pushed open the doors and stepped into the daylight. Because it looks like the game just got a lot bigger.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.